My mom had a brain aneurysm in the middle of the night without any warning. She was put in intensive care, and after about 45 days, she was put into a skilled nursing facility. They had her on a ventilator, and the care cost was about $18,000 a month. The insurance only covered about 100 days.
So many people are dealing with elderly parents and loved ones. There are so many tough decisions to be made. And if you don't have the right information, you can't make the right decisions. So we've created this DVD to try to help. We wanted to provide you information to help you make those tough decisions. As you embark on the difficult journey of caring for an elderly loved one or a parent, you have to know at least the basics, and there are 4 basics. Number 1, health care. What are the health care needs for your elderly parent or loved one? Basic number 2, place. Where can they get the appropriate care for their needs? Basic number 3, how are you going to pay for that care? That's a biggie. And basic number 4, documents. If you're going to make all these decisions, you have to have the legal documents in order, something that gives you the power to make those decisions. So when we wrap all of these 4 basics up, we call it the Elder Care Continuum. And we're going to be talking about that for a few minutes to help you kind of navigate the maze of caring for your elderly parent or loved one. We're going to spend a few moments talking about the Elder Care Continuum. So when we look at basic number 1, the health care continuum line, it's really important to find where your parent or your elderly loved one falls on this line. If they're over to the left, fairly independent, that's terrific. But we all know that as your parent or your loved one ages, they're going to move down the continuum to the right. So usually the first stop is a little bit of memory loss, maybe a little bit of things like memory impairment. Perhaps they are mismanaging their medications a bit. Perhaps they're not eating well. Perhaps they're a little frail. They need some assistance. That's usually the first stop. And as they continue to age, usually they go down the continuum a little bit more to the right, and there we have a little bit more impairment. Perhaps Alzheimer's disease is setting in. Perhaps they can't resist undue influence. They're signing up for every mail scam in the book. Family members are taking advantage of them. They're writing big checks to the gardeners or the contractors. Perhaps they're having falls because they're getting very, very frail, and those falls are resulting in maybe broken hips, maybe broken shoulders, bumps on the head, things like that. They go down the line a little bit more, and now we have more care that's needed. They really should not be left alone. Perhaps they have very severe incapacity issues, Parkinson's disease, things like that. Perhaps they cannot transfer out of bed. Perhaps they really are at risk of falling. There's so many issues in this first health care line. You really need to look at where they are and where they're going. So the first line is very important, and it leads right into the second line, which is the place for their care. Now, every senior wants to stay in their home. Who wouldn't? That's over again to the left. So if they're independent and they're able to manage their medications and they're pretty good mentally, that's great. Have them stay in the home. That's where they need to be. But as they progress down the healthcare line to the right, the placement line also changes. So it may be where they are having memory loss, where they're mismanaging their medications. They really shouldn't be left alone. They really need some assistance. That might be in-home caregivers. Well, then you become you need to be aware of situations like, what's the best caregiver situation to have? Do you have a family member? Do you have an agency? Do you become the employer of record where you have to get workers' comp insurance and you need to deal with the labor board and pay the taxes and things like that? What's the best thing for your situation? Maybe in-home caregivers is not the right thing under the circumstances. Maybe your parent or your loved one has progressed too far down the health care line to really stay in the home with assistance. So perhaps now your placement line is moving also down towards the right. Maybe now you need to look at an assisted living facility. Assisted living facilities are usually beautiful communities. They try and keep people as independent as possible, but the meals are cooked for them. They have lots of stimulating activities. There's lots of community involvement. They're just wonderful places. But again, your parent or loved one has to be fairly independent. The care needs can only be up to a certain level. Perhaps they have surpassed that and now they need to move farther down the placement continuum to a board and care facility. And a board and care facility is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, typically house in a residential neighborhood. There's usually 24/7 caregivers on staff. The meals are cooked, but the people in the care facilities, in the board and cares, require more hands-on care, more assistance with activities of daily living than people usually in assisted living facilities or in their own home. Now, if the parent has traveled way down that elder care continuum and they've bypassed the assisted living facilities and the board and cares, it may be where they need a skilled nursing facility. That's nursing home. And that's really where most people do not want to end up. I know in my family, they've told me, I do not want to be in a nursing home, and perhaps your parent or loved one has said the same thing. If we can avoid the nursing home, if we can keep the parent to the left of the elder care continuum, that's what we want to do. But if we ignore line number 1, the health care, if we let that parent slip down the health care continuum to the right, and we don't monitor that parent, and if we don't get them the care they need to keep them as independent as possible, we have a great big triangle. We have a care gap. And if we have the care gap because the senior is too far down the health care line continuum and it's not matching up with the place continuum line, that big triangle, that's a danger. When we have that danger, then what usually happens is we have a fall, we have a stroke, we have medication mismanagement problems, and it usually takes them right into the hospital or right into a skilled nursing facility, or worse, right to the grave. And that's what we don't want. So if we manage these two lines, we can keep them to the left of the continuum and keep them as independent as possible and give them the best quality of life that they deserve. So this brings us to line number 3. Basic number 3 is payment. This is probably the biggest question I get, is how are we going to pay for the care? Well, we really have to look at several sources. Now, the first on the left, again, of the payment continuum line is private payment. And that's where we look to the seniors' resources. We look to their savings, their brokerage accounts, that sort of thing. And most people can't pay for years and years of care. It's just not in their budget. We call it the burn rate. The outgoing money far exceeds their income. That's a real problem, and we're afraid they're going to run out of money. So usually most seniors don't have the private resources to pay for the care that they need. We may have to look to a reverse mortgage, but we really don't want to do that if we can avoid it, because reverse mortgages are extremely expensive. Perhaps we need to trigger a long-term care policy. We need to read the fine details, the fine print, figure out, is this the time? Perhaps deal with denials from the insurance companies, things like that. We have issues usually involved with getting the payment if it's from private resources. Then we need to look at other sources of income to help pay for the care, such as VA benefits. Perhaps mom or dad was a veteran. And if they were a veteran and they served during wartime and they meet certain qualifications and certain income and asset limits, well, we can apply for aid and attendance benefits, and that can be a significant contribution to their care. For a married couple, we can get over $1,900 a month for care needs. But we have to have all the information, and applying for VA benefits can be extremely burdensome and tedious. So you really have to probably get professional assistance in that area. And the first thing they will ask is, what is the income? What are the assets? What are the unreimbursed medical expenses? We have to get the whole picture before we can apply for those benefits. And the rules constantly change. Well, perhaps they need to just get community resources. Perhaps we need to get Meals on Wheels, get the senior center involved. Maybe we need Dial-A-Ride. We have adult day health care centers that provide great care. You need to be aware of what the community resources are, and maybe we need to get some or all of them involved, and that will really be a great contribution to keeping your parent or loved one in their own home or happy and have a good quality of life. Perhaps we've reached the point where we really don't have any personal resources anymore. Perhaps we need to apply for medi-cal, and medi-cal is a needs-based program. Primarily it pays for skilled nursing care. When someone is in the nursing home, that's when we need to look to medi-cal for payment. Now, medi-cal, the rules, again, they change constantly, and the rules are different for single people and married couples. So if you have a couple and they're in the home and one has Alzheimer's disease, or they're a stroke victim, or they have some catastrophic illness, and we're worried about keeping the well spouse in the home, independent as possible, good quality of life, but we know that the ill spouse is heading towards a skilled nursing facility, we need to look at medi-cal and possibly restructure the assets so we can get that really important benefit. That may take time, so advanced planning is really crucial and really key for those types of situations. So now we look to line number 4, and this basic is documents, legal documents. So there's usually one person who is the quarterback when you're dealing with an elderly loved one, and it's usually an adult child or an adult family member. Now, for that person, and let's say that person is you, to be able to be an advocate, to make these important decisions, to get the right care in place, to pay for that care, to apply for benefits, you need to have the appropriate legal documents. So advanced planning is key. You need to look at the situation and figure out, does the loved one have a power of attorney, a health care directive? Do they need a trust? Do they need a will? You need to analyze these things, and hopefully that elderly loved one still has capacity to update the documents or to create new ones and give the legal authority to that trusted individual so they can be the quarterback and make these important decisions if the loved one can't. So when we're looking at documents, what's important? Well, a power of attorney is critical. And the power of attorney really has to have a lot of specific language in it. That language has to deal with public benefits, such as medi-cal, asset restructuring, dealing with public benefits, dealing with the VA, dealing with Social Security. Things like that need to be in this power of attorney document. Advanced health care directives are critical. Who is going to be the advocate for that senior? Who's going to talk to the doctor, direct the care? Say, no, mom and dad wouldn't want that, they would want this instead. You need to have the legal authority to be able to speak with the doctors and make those important decisions. That's all through the health care directive. And also, importantly, you have to have HIPAA releases in that document so you can get the medical records if you need to change facilities, get different doctors, things of that nature. You also need to look at other documents such as trusts, wills. Those again are so important. If the elderly loved one is not able to manage their finances anymore, if they're subject to undue influence, do they have a trust? What does the trust say? Are the assets in the trust? And who is named as the next trustee? So they can then manage those assets, pay the bills, things like that. So it's important not only to have the right legal documents in place that give you the proper legal authority, but you need to know what's in those documents and how to use them properly, and that is key. Now, with all these documents, you have to remember that the elderly loved one must have sufficient legal capacity to sign those documents. They have to know what's in them. So if you wait too long, they can't sign. And then they have to go to court, or you have to go to court to get a conservatorship. And you really don't want to go down that route if you can possibly avoid it. You would much rather plan early, plan in advance, have mom and dad be part of the process, and have them appoint the person who they trust to be that advocate, to be that quarterback. Have them sign while they have capacity, and then you have the legal documents that you need to manage their care.
Taking care of my mom was really difficult. We set up a plan and we got her approved for medi-cal. My dad was able to support himself, and because of the plan, everything worked out really well.
My goal in creating this DVD is to give you some basic information that may help you in the challenges that you may be facing. The information presented here is no substitute for expert legal or medical advice. From our family to yours, we wish you all the best. Hello, I'm Jane.
Hi.